Everdeen, and today I'm going to show you how to crochet this Coachella inspired crop top. This design is loosely based off of the crochet top that Vanessa and Hudgens wore a few years ago, and I say that it's loosely based because honestly I couldn't figure out how to make it. But I tried my best and I think I got pretty close, so let's get started. For this project I'm using size 4 yarn from the brand Impeccable as well as a size 5mm hook. And the very first step is to chain a chain that is long enough to cover your midsection. Now depending on what kind of blouse you want, if you want it to be a crop top or if you want it to be a full blouse that goes all the way down to your hips, that's going to determine how many chains you're going to make on this step. The more chains that you make, the more coverage you're going to have. Mine is more like a crop top, so I only chained 15, but if you want it to be longer, then you need to chain more. If you want it to be shorter, then just chain less. So after I have created my chain, I'm going to go back on that chain with a single crochet. And if you're unfamiliar with what a single crochet is, or you're a beginner to crochet, I do have a crocheting for beginners video that will be linked in the description box below. This top is a little bit more complicated, so I would suggest that you start off with an easier tutorial, which I will also link in the description box below of the crocheting for beginners video. So yeah, I have plenty of tutorials for beginners as well. This one's a little bit more complicated, so yeah. So after you reach the end of that row of single crochet, you're going to chain 3, flip it over, skip a stitch and go into that second stitch from the end of the row. Make a triple crochet, which is yarn over through the stitch, yarn over back through the stitch, yarn over through 1 loop, yarn over through 2 loops, and yarn over through the last 2 loops. And if you missed that, I'm going to do it again. Yarn over through the stitch, yarn over back through the stitch, yarn over through 1 loop, yarn over through 2 loops, and yarn over through the last 2 loops. And that's what I call a triple crochet. Not sure if it's right or not. I usually get mixed answers. But anyway, once you make 2 triple crochets in a row in the same exact stitch, you're going to chain 1 and then create 2 more triple crochets in the same exact stitch. So total of 4 triple crochets in 1 stitch with 1 chain in between. And that is what I call an open shell stitch, what you just created right here. See this little opening? It's going to be really important if you're in the next row. So after you created your open shell stitch, you're going to chain 2, skip 3 stitches, and then go into that 4th stitch with a triple crochet. Again, yarn over through the stitch, yarn over back through the stitch, yarn over through 1 loop, yarn over through 2 loops, and then yarn over through the last 2 loops. And again, yarn over through the stitch, yarn over back through the stitch, yarn over through 1 loop, yarn over through 2 loops, yarn over through the last 2 loops. Yay! And then you're going to chain 1 and then create your next 2 triple crochets in the same exact stitch. Yarn over through the stitch, yarn over back through the stitch, yarn over through 1 loop, yarn over through 2 loops, yarn over through the last 2 loops, and there is your next open shell stitch. Yay! And now you're just going to continue with that pattern until the end of the row. Super easy, right? Yes, very easy. So you're going to chain 2, you're going to skip 3 stitches because you really want that gap in between the open shell stitches just because it makes the design look nicer. And then you're going to create your last open shell stitch. Well, if you chained only 15 like me, but if you chained more, then obviously you're going to make more. It totally depends on what size you want this top to be, so everyone's going to have a different number of stitches, and that's okay. You can still follow this tutorial. You just have to adjust it a little bit. So after you've created your last open shell stitch, you're going to chain 2 and reach on over to the very last stitch of the row and then create 1 lone triple crochet, and that will be the marker for the end of the row. And then you're going to chain 3, flip the project over, and then make an open shell stitch within the opening of the previous row's open shell stitch. So I told you that that opening was going to be important later on, and that's what's going to hold your next row of open shell stitches. So it's actually a little bit easier than the first one. You don't have to worry about counting the number of stitches to skip because you just go into the previous row's open shell stitch and you stack it like this. Super easy. And that's what the project should look like as of right now. And then after you make that, you're going to chain two, and then make your next open shell stitch within the previous row's open shell stitch. So that's 2 triple crochets and then a chain in the middle and then 2 more triple crochets, and then you chain 2 and then reach on over to the other side until you reach the end of the row, and then you make your lone triple crochet, and yeah, you just continue with that pattern. Once you reach the end of the row and make that lone triple crochet, you're going to chain 3 and then reach on over to the open shell stitch from the previous row and then create more open shell stitches on top of open shell stitches, and then you just go on and on and on and on until your project is able to wrap around yourself like so. Just leave a little bit of space in between your chest. That way you can have that nice lace-up design, but you don't want it too big. You want to just leave a little bit of space in between for that design, but overall you want this to pretty much wrap around you almost completely. Probably leave like an inch worth of space. So after you've completed that part of the project, instead of working vertically, you're going to flip it horizontally and start working on it this way, which may be confusing, but if you line it up like this, where this is the part that's going to wrap around your body, this part is going to be the part that covers your chest, basically. This part covers your ribs and midsection, and the part that we're going to work on now is going to cover your chest. So from here, I'm chaining 3 and then kind of eyeballing the distance it would be to skip 3 stitches, because obviously there's no stitches on the side right here. So I'm just kind of guessing to see what the spacing is. But I'm basically doing the same exact thing I was doing the first section right here, just on the side of the project. And this is going to serve as this area of the top. So basically you just do the same thing, really easy. Make open shell stitches, and then when you reach the end of the row, you're going to make your lone triple crochet, and that's the end of that. Then you're going to flip it over and then do the exact same thing that you did for the first part of this project. You're just going to chain 3, reach on over to the open shell stitches and create more open shell stitches on top of the open shell stitches. And the open shell stitches are comprised of 2 triple crochets, a chain in the middle, and then 2 more triple crochets after that. And then once you've created your open shell stitch, you're going to chain 2 and then reach on over to the other open shell stitch and create more and more until finally you put the project against yourself and it covers your chest. And for me, since I have a rather small chest, it only took 7 rows for me to do this, but if your chest is larger, then it may require you to make more rows. So always put the project against yourself and see how you're doing. So now what I'm going to do is single crochet my way down the side of the project all across to the opposite end and do the exact same thing that I just did. So I'm going to start from where I ended off and create 2 single crochets inside of every gap. There's no real stitches along this part of the project that I could make single crochets into, so I'm just going into the gaps and making 2 single crochets per gap just to make it nice and smooth as opposed to jagged like it is right here. I like doing that again to make it smoother, and also so I don't have to continuously cut and reattach the yarn. I could just single crochet my way across. So now I've stopped right here, and I'm going to basically do the same exact thing I did on the opposite end and create my open shell stitches, also 7 rows of them so they're nice and even. And this is how I'm going to begin. So from the single crochet that I was working on, I'm just going to create 1 triple crochet, and that will be my marker for the end of the row. And then I'm just going to continue making open shell stitches, and again I'm going to create 7 rows of open shell stitches. That way it is even with the opposite side. And you know the deal, just 2 triple crochets, a chain in between, and then 2 more triple crochets inside of the same stitch. And now the 2 sides are identical. Yay, nice and even, perfect. So this is what the project should look like so far. And you may not see what's going on here, but it's totally going to be a shirt later on, don't worry. So now that we got those 2 sides done, we're going to work on the middle portion of the top right here, and this is going to be the design that covers your back. Yeah, so we're just going to go back and forth in between these 2 sides right here. And again, I'm just going to start where I left off from the open shell stitches and single crochet my way down the side of the open shell stitches that I made, because again, I don't really want to cut off and then reattach the yarn if I could just single crochet my way down. So now that I'm down here, I'm going to start off my first row with a chain of 4, and then I'm going to skip a stitch and go into that second stitch and slip stitch into that second stitch to attach those chains and essentially make a little loop. So the first row is going to be nothing but loops. So 1, 2, 3, 4 chains, and then skip a stitch, and then go into that second stitch and slip stitch into it to attach the loop. And the reason I decided to make this first row nothing but loops is because that's what the picture looks like it is, but I don't think that it's really accurate. At least if this part is right, the rest of the project isn't right. But again, I got as close as I possibly could to this design, and I hope you still enjoy it. So you're just going to continue making loops throughout that first row, and again, all it is chaining 4 and then skipping a stitch and then slip stitching into the next one. And yeah, then you should be done with your very first row of this portion of the project. And after you've completed all your loops and you've reached the end, then you're going to slip stitch into 2 stitches on the inner side of the open shell stitches that you made, and then you're going to continue with your next row. And the next row is double crochets inside of every loop. So you're going to make 2 double crochets inside of every loop that you made. And it's going to look like a little V like this. And you're not going to make any chains in between. You're just going to go to the next loop and create 2 more double crochets. And double crochet. And boom, that's what it should look like. And the reason I decided not to chain in between each set of double crochets is because then it will create more and more chains or more and more stitches per row, and you don't want to increase in the project because then your project will look very wonky. So by doing this, it allows every row to be even and not increase in stitches. So this is what the project should look like so far, and once you reach the very end, then you're going to again slip stitch into 2 stitches in the inner side of the open shell stitches that you made, and then flip the project over and then continue to make double crochets, except you're not going to make any double crochets in between the double crochets that you made in the previous row. You're going to make them in the gaps in between the sets of double crochets. Yeah, so you don't want to make the double crochets within the previous rows of double crochets like you did for the open shell stitches. You're going to make them in the gaps in between. So in the end, after you've made a couple of them, you'll see that it's going to be like a kind of checkered pattern. So they're not going to be stacked on top of each other. They're going to be adjacent to one another, if that's the right word. They're going to look like checkers. So again, you're not going to chain anything in between the 2 double crochets. You're just going to reach over to the next gap and then create 2 double crochets and continue with that pattern until you reach the very end of the row, in which you will slip stitch into 2 stitches and then continue on with the pattern with the next row. So you just continue on with 2 double crochets inside of every gap until you're level with the rest of the project. And once you're level with the rest of the project, then it should look something like this overall. Again, not exact to the design that's on the Vanessa and Hudgens photo, but I tried my best to get pretty close, and I think it looks pretty good still. So now we're going to work on the straps. So from here, we're going to make some more open shell stitches and create a strap. And it does get a little complicated here, so I'll try my very best to explain it, but if you've been here long enough, I'm not very good at explaining things. So, what we're going to do first is start off where we left off from the double crochets, and we're going to chain 3 and go into the open shell stitch that's nearest and create another open shell stitch on top of the previous rows of open shell stitches. So we're going to create one more row of just a normal open shell stitch row that we've normally been making. So open shell stitch, and then you're going to chain 2 and reach on over to the next open shell stitch, create 2 triple crochets, chain 1, create another 2 triple crochets, and then you're done with that open shell stitch. And then you're going to chain 2 and then reach on over to the last open shell stitch, or until you reach the last open shell stitch, because again, I didn't really need to make that many since I have a small chest, but you may need to make more if your chest is larger. So yeah, so once I reach the very end, I'm going to chain 2, reach on over to the very last stitch, and create a triple crochet to mark the end of the row. And that's what that should look like. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So normally you would chain 3 and then reach on over to the open shell stitch. Now you're not going to chain anything, and you're just going to reach on over to the open shell stitch. That way the project will pull inward and essentially decrease or become smaller. So you're just going to make the open shell stitch as you normally would. The only difference was that you did not chain 3 chains at the end of the row. You just reached over, and now after you've made that open shell stitch, you're going to do the same thing. You're not going to chain anything. You're just going to reach over to the next open shell stitch. And then after you've created the middle open shell stitch, then you're going to again not chain anything and then create the last open shell stitch. Or, if you're making more open shell stitches than me, then you just don't chain anything in between the open shell stitches, because you want everything to pull inward, and eventually you're only going to want one open shell stitch, and that one open shell stitch is going to serve as your strap. And that may be a little bit confusing for now, but it'll make sense later on. So from the end of the row, you are actually going to chain 3 and then reach on over to only the middle stitch and create another open shell stitch on top of the middle open shell stitch only. So after you have created that one open shell stitch, you're going to chain 3 and then reach on over to the very end of the row and just attach the chain with a slip stitch to the end of the row, and now you only have one open shell stitch in that entire row. You pretty much erased the other two from the row, and that's exactly what you want. So from the end, you're going to chain 3 and then reach on over to the open shell stitch and then create another open shell stitch on top of it. And after you've created that open shell stitch on top of the previous open shell stitch, then you're going to decrease even more and only chain 1 after you've created that open shell stitch, and then you're going to reach on over to the very end of the row and create your sole triple crochet to mark the end of the row, and then you're going to flip the project over, chain 2, create an open shell stitch on top of the previous row's open shell stitch, and 2 more triple crochets to finish the open shell stitch here. Woo. And then you're going to chain 2, make a triple crochet to mark the end of the row, and then chain 2, create another open shell stitch on top of the previous row of open shell stitch, and you're going to continue with this pattern until you have crocheted enough open shell stitches to make a strap that is long enough to cover your shoulder to your back. Basically long enough to serve as a proper strap. It's going to look like this once it's done. So it's going to start from obviously the front, and then you're just going to fold around your strap or your shoulder and then end at your back. So you've created your first strap, and now you have to go and do the other one. So what I'm going to do is instead of detaching the yarn and then reattaching it to the other side, I'm going to single crochet all along the side of the strap down the front portion of the top, and then I'm going to go back on it all the way up to where I started, and then across the strap down the other end, all across the back of the top to the opposite side. And once I reach the opposite side, I'm going to make the other strap of open shell stitches the exact same way I did the first side. And yeah, so again, I started from here, went all the way down with my single crochet, and then I went back up, and once I reached the point where I started, then I went across and then down and then across the back portion of the top to the other side. Then I created my open shell stitch strap the same way I did the other side. Very complicated way. Hopefully I explained it okay. And after I was done making it, I did the exact same thing. So from here, I single crocheted my way down the front portion of the top, then made my way back up, and then went across and down this side of the strap, and now I'm right here. Woohoo! So essentially, I'm actually done with this portion of the project, and this is what it should look like at this point. So overall, it doesn't look like a shirt unless you actually set it up like a shirt like this, and now you can kind of see what it's supposed to look like. And it looks like a shirt, right? Yes. And this is what it looks like when you open it up. Totally doesn't look like a shirt. But trust me, it's going to come together quite nicely. And okay, so let's move on. You're going to detach the yarn from the yarn ball finally and seal up the last stitch like so, and then I usually cut off my excess yarn later. And now we're going to work on the design at the bottom. Yay! Now I had no idea how the heck to make this portion of the top, but essentially they look like little flowers to me, so I tried my best. So from the end, you're going to chain 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you're going to go into the very first stitch you made that first chain in, and you're going to slip stitch into it. And once you've slip stitched into it, you're going to be left with like a little nub, and then you're just going to chain another 4, go into the same exact stitch, and then chain another 4, go into the same exact stitch with a slip stitch, and then go 1 over and make a slip stitch there to really attach your little flower. And this is what it should look like a little flower slash little clover kind of thing. And I was practicing with these. I know I was supposed to start from the end, but I kind of had a little trouble figuring it out, so I finally got some good footage right when I was in the middle, so that's what I showed you. But basically that's what I started off with the end as well, and then you just continue with that pattern all throughout the row, and it should look something like this. So you make a little flower, and then you slip stitch into the project like 3 times to create a little gap in between each flower, and then you continue making those little flowers throughout the entire row until you reach the end. And once you're at the end, then it's time to make a strap. And all you have to do to make a strap is chain a very long chain. My chain is about 100 chains. I'd never count my stitches or rows or anything. So basically what I do is I line the chain up, and if I could crisscross it like I just did right here, then I know it's long enough. And then once it's long enough, I go back on that chain with a slip stitch just to make the chain a little bit thicker. That way it's more sturdy, and I feel like it also looks cooler. If it's just a chain as a strap, I think it's too flimsy, but with a slip stitch on it, it looks way cooler. So I'm going to slip stitch all the way down here, and then detach the yarn from the yarn ball, reattach the yarn to the opposite side, and then create the same length of a chain on that side as well. So I'm left with 2 straps. And once I've made my second strap, I'm going to detach the yarn from the yarn ball once again, and then seal off my project so it doesn't unravel. That would be very annoying. And then cut off the excess yarn later. So now I have both of my straps here, and now I'm going to create the crisscross design, or the lace-up design, whatever it's called, not sure, by first aligning the strap where I want to attach it to. That way I know it looks nice, and I have an idea of every point I'm going to attach the straps to. So I first attach one side, and then I attach the other side opposite to it. And the way I attach the straps is I grab one from one side and then bring it through with my hook to the opposite side, and there you go, it's nice and attached, very easy. And that's what it looks like. Once I've attached it to the opposite side, I bring it back over to the original side and then attach it the same exact way. And then once I've attached that strap, I grab the opposite strap and do the same thing, just of course on the opposite side. And then once I'm done, it should look like this. Yay! And I really like the way it came out. I think it looks really nice. So once you're done with those middle straps, so you could put your top on and take it off easily, then it's time to attach your other straps. Otherwise, it would be very hard for this top to stay on. So you're going to flip the project over and then line your straps to where you want them to be attached. And then you're going to attach them with a slip stitch as well. So all you have to do is attach your yarn to where you want the strap to be at. And then you're going to bring your hook through both the strap and the top. So that's the top, and then now I'm taking my hook and putting it through the strap and then yarning over and create a slip stitch through both of them. So make sure that you go through a stitch that's on the top and a stitch that is on the strap. That way you can attach them together with that slip stitch. And once you have gone through all of the stitches that are on the strap. So make sure that you go to the very end. This is going to be the last one right here. And slip stitch through both. And there you go, nice and attached. And so this is what it looks like on the inside, and then that's what it looks like on the outside. Much cleaner because you want the cleaner side to show, and then the inside where nobody sees, that's where you want that to show. So yeah, you're going to now detach the yarn from the yarn ball and then reattach it to the other side. That way you can do the same exact thing to the other strap. Now, I think that the top looks great like this. It could totally be finished just like this, and it looks fabulous and wonderful. However, you can add one more thing to make it absolutely amazing, and that's tassels. So I honestly don't know how to make a tassel. I just made this up, so I don't know if this is the proper way to make a tassel. If not, if you think this is weird, then just look up how to make a tassel. So basically all I did was wrap some yarn around my fingers. This is how long I want my tassel to be, and once I was satisfied with how thick the tassel was going to be, I cut the yarn from the yarn ball, as well as cut the yarn at the bottom. That way all the yarn is loose from one end and like a loop on the other end. And then I put my hook through the end of one of the straps and brought the loop through that stitch, which yeah, took a lot of effort to do, but eventually I did it. This is what it looks like. The entire tassel through that one little loop at the end of the strap. And then from there, I brought all the loose ends of the tassel through the big loop. Little by little this time, not all at once. And then once I was done with that, I gave the tassel a tug, and that was it. Completed the tassel, and I think it looks pretty good. I mean, it's a little uneven at the bottom, but I could just cut it and make it even, and it'll look much nicer. So that's how I made a tassel. And then I'm just going to do the exact same thing to the other side. And once I have done that, then I am completely done with the project, and I'm very happy with the way it came out. I really like that I added the tassels that gave it that extra oomph of bohemian style, and it really just brought everything together. But of course, it looks great even without the tassels, so if you want to skip the tassels, then that's cool too. Overall, I think that this top came out pretty good. This is the first crochet top tutorial that I made with a solid back that's not a sweater, so hopefully you enjoyed it. I know it was highly requested, and again, I tried my best to follow the reference photo, even though I know that it's totally not the same, but I hope you still like it. And I think I forgot to mention throughout the entire video that I will have a blog post that goes along with this tutorial to serve as additional information just in case you got stuck in a part or you prefer written text pattern as opposed to a video tutorial. That will be linked in the description box below. Please visit my website, KrystalEverdeen.com, for more information and other blog posts and stuff. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, found it helpful or entertaining or cool, please give it a thumbs up and also click that red subscribe button if you have not already, so I can see you next time. Bye!